when Lewis Hamilton moved to Ferrari this season, everyone expected fireworks on track. What nobody anticipated was the drama unfolding over team radio becoming the biggest talking point of his early Ferrari career. The seven-time world champion has found himself constantly defending his relationship with race engineer Riccardo Adami after a series of tense radio exchanges that have had the F1 world buzzing with speculation. But Hamilton isn't having any of it, firing back with characteristic bluntness that most of the chatter is simply BS. Let's rewind to where this all started. When Hamilton made his blockbuster switch from Mercedes to Ferrari for 2025, he left behind more than just a championship-winning car. He also said goodbye to Peter Bonington, his trusted race engineer who'd been by his side through 6 of his 7 world titles. You know, the guy behind the legendary "It's Hammer Time" radio calls that became synonymous with Hamilton's Mercedes dominance. Instead of Bonington following him to Maranello, Hamilton found himself paired with Riccardo Adami, a seasoned Ferrari engineer who'd previously worked with Sebastian Vettel during the team's last serious championship fight, and more recently with Carlos Sainz. On paper, it looked like a solid match. In practice, well, that's where things got interesting. The first signs of friction appeared during Hamilton's very first race weekend in Ferrari Red, at the Australian Grand Prix. The conditions were treacherous, with rain making life difficult for everyone, but it was Hamilton's radio communications that caught attention. Starting from 8th on the grid, he struggled to make progress and his frustration began to show over the airwaves. Former F1 driver Martin Brundle was among those who criticized Hamilton's tone with his new engineer, but Hamilton pushed back hard against these criticisms. He pointed out that he was being as polite as possible, saying he told Adami to "leave it to me, please," rather than using any aggressive language. Hamilton even made a pointed comparison to Max Verstappen's famously heated exchanges with his race engineer, Gianpiero Lambiase, questioning why his relatively mild comments were getting so much attention. As Hamilton put it at the time, if you want to hear real drama, go listen to the conversations that Max has had with his engineer over the years, and the abuse that the poor guy has taken. Yet somehow, his own polite disagreements were making headlines while Verstappen's more colorful language barely registered. But the Australian GP was just the beginning. The real controversy erupted during the Miami Grand Prix in May, when Hamilton delivered what became an instant meme-worthy moment. As the Ferrari pit wall deliberated over whether to swap positions between him and teammate Charles Leclerc, Hamilton's patience wore thin. His sarcastic suggestion over the radio, "Have a tea break while you're at it." The comment perfectly captured Hamilton's frustration with what he saw as indecisive strategy calls, but it also set the tone for how his radio communications would be scrutinized for the rest of the season. Every exchange with Adami was now being analyzed for signs of tension, turning routine driver-engineer conversations into headline news. Things reached a boiling point at the Monaco Grand Prix, where a series of radio issues and miscommunications created the most dramatic chapter yet in this ongoing saga. The weekend started badly for Hamilton when he received a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Max Verstappen during qualifying. The incident wasn't Hamilton's fault. It was caused by his team giving him incorrect information about Verstappen's approach. This mistake by the pit wall, specifically involving Adami's communication, cost Hamilton dearly. Instead of starting higher up the grid where he belonged, he found himself stuck behind slower cars for much of the race, unable to show the true pace of his Ferrari. During the Monaco race itself, Hamilton's radio exchanges with Adami became increasingly tense. When he asked about the gap to the cars ahead, specifically whether the leading group was still nearly a minute ahead, Adami's response about tire strategies and fighting between cars didn't directly answer the question. Hamilton's reply was telling, "You're not answering the question. It doesn't really matter, I guess." But it was what happened after the race that really got people talking. On the cool-down lap, after being told he'd finished 5th and lost time in traffic, Hamilton thanked the team for fixing his car after Saturday's crash. Then, after a period of radio silence, he asked the question that would dominate headlines. "Are you upset with me or something?" The response? Complete silence. That moment of dead air became the defining image of Hamilton's early Ferrari struggles. Here was a 7-time world champion, seemingly unsure of where he stood with his own race engineer. The clip went viral, with fans and media alike speculating about what was really going on behind the scenes at Ferrari. But, according to Hamilton and the Ferrari team, the truth was far more mundane than the dramatic narrative being spun in the media. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur quickly moved to explain the radio silence, pointing out the unique challenges of communicating during the Monaco Grand Prix. As Vasseur explained, when a driver asks something between turn 1 and turn 3 at Monaco, the team has to wait until the tunnel section to reply. It's not that they're ignoring the driver or having issues, it's a pre-agreed safety protocol to prevent distracting drivers during the most challenging parts of the lap. Vasseur was adamant that there was no real tension, explaining that drivers often ask questions when they're under pressure, fighting at 300 km/h between the walls of Monaco. He confirmed that he spoke with Hamilton after the race and that the British driver wasn't upset at all. Hamilton himself backed up this explanation when questioned about the incident ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix. He confirmed that there were radio problems in certain areas of the Monaco track, and that he didn't receive all the information he wanted during the race. Most importantly, he emphasized that he and Adami spoke afterwards to clear the air. But Hamilton didn't stop at just explaining the Monaco incident. He went on the offensive against what he saw as unfair media speculation. His response was characteristically direct and unfiltered. Speaking to reporters in Barcelona, Hamilton made his position crystal clear. There's a lot of speculation, he said, and most of it is BS. He emphasized that he and Adami have a great relationship and that the Italian engineer has been amazing to work with. Hamilton praised Adami as a great guy who's working incredibly hard, just as he is. The Mercedes legend was particularly keen to address the idea that their working relationship was somehow broken or dysfunctional. He pointed out that they don't always get everything right every weekend, which is normal in Formula One, and that they do have disagreements, just like everyone does in relationships. The key difference is that they work through these issues rather than letting them fester. Hamilton emphasized the shared goals that bind him and Adami together. They're both committed to winning a championship together and both working towards lifting Ferrari back to the top of Formula One. For Hamilton, all the media speculation is just noise that doesn't affect the job they're trying to do. The relationship dynamics that Hamilton described paint a picture of two professionals still learning how to work together effectively. He acknowledged that they're constantly learning more about each other and adapting their working styles to find the best approach. Given that Adami has worked with multiple different drivers before, including champions like Vettel, this adaptation period is completely normal. What's perhaps most telling about Hamilton's defense of his relationship with Adami is how emphatic he was about the lack of any real problems. He repeatedly used phrases like "no problems at all" and "no problems whatsoever," making it clear that he sees the media narrative as completely overblown. To understand why this story has generated so much attention, it's worth considering the context of Hamilton's move to Ferrari. When the most successful driver of the modern era joins Formula One's most famous team, every aspect of that transition gets scrutinized. The pressure on both Hamilton and Ferrari to deliver immediate results is enormous, and when those results don't materialize quickly, the focus shifts to finding explanations. Hamilton's performance in his first season with Ferrari hasn't lived up to the sky-high expectations. After 8 races, he sits 6th in the championship, 16 points behind teammate Leclerc, and 98 points behind championship leader Oscar Piastri. More significantly, he's yet to stand on the podium in a regular race for Ferrari, with only a sprint race win in Shanghai to show for his efforts. The gap to Leclerc has been particularly concerning for Hamilton fans. In Monaco, where the relationship drama reached its peak, Hamilton finished 48 seconds behind his teammate, a massive gap that can't be explained away by strategy or bad luck alone. The data shows that Hamilton is still struggling to extract the maximum performance from Ferrari's SF25, with small-time losses adding up to significant deficits over race distance. Hamilton has been honest about this learning curve, admitting after Monaco qualifying that the weekend had been a steep learning process. He's still getting to grips with the characteristics of the Ferrari car, and those subtle differences in handling and setup requirements are costing him precious tenths of a second per lap. This performance context makes the radio drama even more frustrating for Hamilton. Instead of focusing on his adaptation to a new car and team, much of the attention has been on perceived relationship issues that he insists don't exist. It's created an unwelcome distraction during what's already a challenging period in his career. The comparison to his previous partnership with Peter Bonington at Mercedes has been inevitable, but perhaps unfair. Hamilton and Bonington developed their famous chemistry over more than a decade of working together through multiple championship campaigns and countless races. Expecting the same immediate connection with Adami was always unrealistic. What makes Hamilton's situation even more challenging is that he's not just adapting to a new engineer, he's adapting to an entirely different team culture. Ferrari operates differently from Mercedes, with different protocols, different decision-making processes, and different communication styles. The radio exchanges that have caused so much speculation might simply reflect these cultural differences rather than any personal tension. Looking ahead, Hamilton remains optimistic about both his relationship with Adami and Ferrari's championship prospects. Despite being 98 points behind Piastri, he hasn't given up on the 2025 title fight, pointing out that 2/3 of the season remains and anything can happen in Formula One. However, he's also realistic about the challenges, acknowledging that this championship will be much harder to win than previous years. The upcoming Canadian Grand Prix presents a perfect opportunity for Hamilton to shift the narrative back to his on-track performance. Montreal has always been one of his strongest venues. He's won there 7 times, tied with Michael Schumacher for the most victories at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. An 8th win would not only break that record but also deliver his first victory for Ferrari, potentially silencing critics and reducing focus on radio drama. The 4.361-kilometer Montreal circuit, with its unique mix of slow chicanes and high-speed straights, has historically suited Hamilton's driving style. He secured his very first Formula One victory there back in 2007 with McLaren, making it a venue with special significance for his career. However, he hasn't won in Montreal since 2019, with Max Verstappen dominating the last 3 Canadian Grands Prix. For Ferrari, the Canadian GP also represents a chance to gauge whether recent technical regulation changes might shake up the competitive order. New rules about flexible front wings came into effect at the Spanish Grand Prix, with some suggesting they could hurt championship leaders McLaren and potentially benefit teams like Ferrari. Hamilton has expressed cautious optimism about these changes, hoping they might bring Ferrari closer to the front-runners. The technical directive on flexi wings follows a pattern from earlier in the season, when similar rules about rear-wing flexibility were introduced at the Chinese Grand Prix. That change had minimal impact on McLaren's competitive advantage, making the team confident that the latest regulations won't significantly affect their performance either. What's clear from Hamilton's robust defense of his relationship with Adami is that he's determined not to let media speculation become a distraction from Ferrari's championship ambitions. His use of strong language, calling most of the speculation bullshit and dismissing it as noise, shows he's taking this issue seriously and wants to shut down the narrative before it gains further momentum.